Well, the internet, we don't submit it to a censor board or anything, so there could be naughty words in here, but we'll take every opportunity to avoid using them. But we should be posting them on our website, justsaiyan.com.
As a Super Saiyan.
Super Saiyan. It's a gaming community with balls. It's the greatest time right ever. So are we ready to begin? All right, so welcome to the Score Entertainment panel, the rise and fall of Score Entertainment. This is going to be somewhat of a retrospective. Let's start by doing an introduction. We'll have each of our illustrious panelists introduce themselves.
I'm David Eckhart. A lot of you know me as Chipmunk. I'm the lead game developer and lead game designer for a good period of time at Score.
Okay, I'm Garrett Wilkinson. I've been around a long time. That's a little bit longer than Chippy. He doesn't jump ship. But I worked on Inuyasha and Virginia and other properties as well. Aaron, this guy you may not know. So
yeah, I'm Aaron Giddings. I did community manager at Score Entertainment for a little over 5 years on the marketing side, did a lot of the marketing and stuff.
And I'm Joshua Morris, sometimes known as Josh Man, and I started out as a playtester and became marketing coordinator for Score right up until the end. I was there for the last day. So for some of us, because not everyone might not know what Score was about, there are still people to this day who are surprised to hear certain things were made by us, like epic battles. Garrett, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Score did and what products they had?
yeah, we put up a lot. I had to make a list earlier to remember them all. So we're kind of going to go in order here. As most of you guys probably know, we put out Dragon Ball Z. I'm sure most of you guys played that tournament yesterday. And we did run into another tournament that we weren't running. That was one of our games, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is about the only time I've ever heard of a game getting canceled because it was making money, but not enough money.
Wow.
Yeah, and then Yu Yu Hakusho, Dragon Ball GT in all its glory, Inuyasha, Case Closed, Dragon Booster, for anybody who attended the other panel, you guys know all about Dragon Booster now, Fruits Baskets, Sonic X, the Dragon Ball Z reboot, affectionately known as ReZ, Epic Battles, which had all types of awesome properties in it, like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, Tekken. If you had a watch list, you can play most of those. And then Bleach, which was the final one we did. We also had a series of projects that we wanted to talk about that never came out. Afterworld, which we actually marketed quite a bit over like a 2-year period. We had promotional videos here at Gen Con for it, and it just never came out. We actually completed the entire set. There was art, everything. The whole set was just sitting there on image files. We even printed out giant demo decks and demoed it 1 year. Just whatever reason, they never pulled the trigger on it. We had a Metalocalypse board game that was designed all the way up to a prototype version of it where you could sit and play it and whatnot. And that got basically to the point where we never could come to a license agreement about releasing it. And then, if you guys attended the panel, also you learned that we spent quite a bit of time trying to develop a Death Note game, but due to the property and whatnot, there was no way we were ever going to release that into the market. And then a lot of people may not know, but the design department of Score Entertainment was also the design department for Bible Quest, which was the way the company was structured. Score Entertainment was just part of a big group of other companies inside of one building under one banner. So we also did like football, baseball, all that stuff. But there, for a while, we had a division that released products based on the Bible. So we had board games, Champions of Faith, which I saw in half-price books the other day for $20, which made me really happy. It was the first time I've ever seen it on a store shelf. They did action figures, some more board games, Exodus to Egypt. What's the card game that they did?
Story Quest or something?
Yeah, we had like a game in a box type card game too. So a lot of people don't realize that this group of people up here was responsible for a whole line of religious products, which is kind of funny if you know us.
And you're here as the lead designer on almost all of them.
Yeah, and I'm a Buddhist, so it was kind of weird and awkward. want to kick it off real quick. I'm assuming most of you guys played those games, or at least one of those games. Anybody here play more than one of those games?
Some of us demoed those games.
Yeah, all right. Well, I just want to thank you guys. If it wasn't for you guys supporting all those products over the year, we wouldn't even be able to be up here having a panel like this. So big thanks to all you guys. You gave us a lot of enjoyment for many years ago. And you guys were the fans, and SCORE's community is like no other, as you guys can see today with the tournaments and whatnot that we're doing today. So big props to all you guys.
Is there anyone in the audience who either worked at SCORE full-time or on a contract basis through playtesting? Because there were a lot of people who worked on this through playtesting.
He did. He's asleep in the corner.
Yeah. Keep up the good work, Ryan.
He's the stage.
Yeah, he's our roadie today. As you can see, he's doing a fabulous job.
Well, that kind of brings us into our first question, though, and that was, how did we come to work at SCORE? Because a common story at SCORE was we were fans, and then all of a sudden we are hired to work on all these properties. And for each of us, it was a little bit different, but it was kind of just an inspiring story where it's just like, oh, I could be a jerk on the internet and then work on the property eventually if I just make a loud enough stink on message boards. So let's start with Chippy, and you can tell us all about how you came to SCORE, because chronologically, Chippy was there first with Garrett and Aaron, and then I came at the end.
Well, part of mine was a little bit of luck, and then a bunch of busted my butt. When Dragon Ball Z was originally designed by Sir Jim Ward,
Sir Jim Ward, yeah.
Sir.
He was knighted.
He was knighted. He actually has a really big track record as far as the hobby gaming industry goes. He was one of the first guys at Gary Gygax's table when he was making Dungeons and Dragons. He came out with like the first sci-fi board game or sci-fi role-playing game and a bunch of stuff. And so he had developed the initial rough Dragon Ball Z game, and they needed somebody to play test it. And so there were some ladies that had some sons, and they were like, well, here, take this game, have your son play it with his friends. And I was friends with one of those gentlemen, Joshua McManus, and so we did some initial play testing, gave them a lot of feedback, which they listened to just a little bit. I mean, you can't have 3 copies of Dragon Balls in your deck, so that was a good change. But yeah, afterwards they were getting tons of emails about rulings and stuff, and they needed somebody to do customer service. And so they hired 3 of us from those original playtesting pods, me and 2 other gentlemen, Joshua McManus that I mentioned, and Joshua Minden. And then later on, when the games division had a head change and got a new lead for the division, he liked promoting from within. So he looked at what we did, what our proficiencies were, and promoted us up to the positions that we had for quite a while. That's how I got to be the lead game developer. And then eventually the lead game designer was through that run.
I played Dragon Ball Z through from Saiyan Saga basically up, all the way up to Fusion. What was it said for Kid Fusion?
Yeah.
Okay, so I played up through Fusion, and I played in San Antonio, which had a really, really strong group of players. That's where Brian Valdez was from. Got 2nd place at a bunch of worlds. Austin Ray was there. He got 2nd in a bunch of tournaments, won a bunch of regionals. And just from playing against those guys all the time, I was able to move up to the 2nd highest ranked player in the world there for a while. And after, as most guys know, the first time they ever did like an open, real playtesting session was on Kid Dude, which is one of the reasons that set seems like it's a little bit more put together than other sets. So, sure. More effort went into that one than other ones, let's put it that way. And so I got a call from Valdez, who was working at the company at that time. He's like, yo, Garrett, do you want to come up and do this little contract gig and help out on Kid Dude? So I went up there with a bunch of other guys and did Kid Dude playtesting for 3 weeks. And then after that was over, they asked me to stay to work as a playtester on Yu Yu Hakusho Set 2. And then after that was over, they asked me if I wanted to stay and work on Dragon Ball GT. Then after that was over, they asked me, "Want to work on you? How much?" I said, $3. And these were all contract things for like a couple of weeks. So after basically 8 months of them putting me in a hotel and living in a hotel on their dime, they were like, you know, if we just hired the guy, we wouldn't be paying a fortune to let him live here, and then paying him basically a full salary anyway. So eventually they offered me a job and I took it, and I came in as a play tester. And I worked on all types of, pretty much all the games from that point. And due to some like changes and whatnot amongst the design staff, the property for Inuyasha was up for grabs, and they had pretty much all the designers were busy working on other projects, so they had no one to design that. So they just threw it down to the playtesting department. And Michael Gibson and I, another gentleman who worked at Score, we designed Inuyasha and put it out, and lo and behold, it turned out to be a pretty big hit for us. So they immediately just bumped us up to designers and put us on that property. And then after that, I worked on a ton of stuff all the way to the very end of designing.
I'm probably the odd man out here because I think I'm the only one at this table that never played DBZ a day in my life, other than a couple of demos so that I could do stuff at the booth. But I started playing some other CCGs that are also no longer in business, and happened to be that one day I met the community manager for Score Entertainment, who was also playing that game, which was Raw Deal back in the day, and I played Buffy. So through that, I got to know him. We ran some events at the store I worked at, and I became somewhat secondhand a playtester for Buffy for a little while. And then when I was in college, they had an intern spot open up because at that point, DBZ was really blowing up, and they were falling way behind in paperwork. So they basically hired me to come in and be a paper pusher as an intern in college to basically follow up on all the data entry and stuff. So that's what I did for a little while, and then as soon as I graduated college, apparently they were happy with what I did, so they actually hired me to come in full-time, and I took on the role of basically being what they called the community manager, which was kind of an adapted role, and it changed over time. But we basically, at that point, when they hired me full-time, was when we first started really opening up all the different property channels to where we started doing different games and stuff. Towards the end there, I mean, I was there for a little over 5 years all total. You know, I started right at the end of Z when we went to GT, and then we had UU blowing up at that point. Shortly thereafter, there was some Inuyasha and whatnot. We all wore, I think, a lot of hats there at the end because they definitely downsized us because of other stuff in the company. So I guess I did a little bit of playtesting on Bleach and Inuyasha at some points, and I helped out and did some design work here and there. And then most of the time I was doing marketing. I was the guy that pretty much wrote most of the advertising you saw in magazines. I was always at most of the trade shows doing, you know, pushing the products and stuff. So, and I think that Josh came on later on there and kind of was my assistant for a little while, and then kind of took his own role. So, pushes get into what you do.
Yeah, mine is actually a little different because I was the only one who started outside of Texas. I was actually in Virginia, and I played the Dragon Ball Z game. I won a few tournaments. I'm still the reigning national champion because I won the very last nationals they ever held for that game. And I was just kind of prominent on the message boards. But I also really like to go to the tournaments, and since I was in high school, I didn't really have a way to like pay for hotel rooms and badges and all this other stuff. So the way I discovered I could do this was I started volunteering for Score, and I started getting experience going to the trade shows and everything. And back then, Funimation was just kind of a really small company, and they started sharing booths with Score. So when I started working for Score, I started making connections at Funimation, which is where I really wanted to be at the time because I was really into anime. And eventually I talked with them so much, and they were bringing me out to conventions to work, that they were just like, sure. Funimation said, come on down, we'll give you an internship position. So I was like hot diggity. The way I was able to do that was I just transferred colleges over to a local Texas college, and I flew on down there to go get my internship at Funimation. Well, when I showed up, they were kind of surprised that I actually did that, and they were just like, all right, we'll give you your internship. You just have to talk to this one person. I'm sure she'll love you, and I'm sure that there'll be no reason why you don't get this internship. So I go and I talk to this one woman, and I think everything's great. And I come back and I'm just like, yeah, living the dream. I'm gonna be working at Funimation. And then about a few hours later, they call and say, we don't know what you said to this woman, but yeah, the internship's not going to happen. And I was like, oh, well, now I'm in Texas. and I don't have a job or an internship or a career path. I mean, I knew SCORE was down here and I had some communication with them. So the silver lining of that story is I eventually did actually go work for Funimation, and I was able to achieve that. But to get into SCORE, that was kind of a different story. I came with a roommate from Maryland, and he was eventually hired as a playtester for some of the games. I think it was like the new Reezy game that they were testing at that point. And I was initially offered a position to do that, but I was enrolled in a bunch of classes that I would have had to drop out of. And at that point, I'd kind of seen a few waves of playtesters, and I knew they were contract positions, and I didn't want to kind of throw away a semester for pretty much a job that really wasn't going to pay too much. It was going to be really sweet and awesome, but I decided not to go that route, which turned out in my benefit, because as usual, a lot of playtesters just cycled out. So while I was going to school, there was a pizza place next door, and every Wednesday, SCORE Entertainment would go have pizza there at noon. And I really wanted to get into SCORE Entertainment at this point, so I started going to this pizza place every Wednesday at noon, and I would join these guys at the table. I'd be like, hey, what's up, guys? You here too? Wow, it's so amazing to see y'all here. And eventually, I made the right connections, and I was one semester away from graduating, and one of the marketing managers kind of took me under her wing, and she was like, well, you've almost got your degree, you know games, you know our games, you know how to play test, and you know all this trade show stuff, because that's what I did all throughout high school and even in college to pay for my convention trips. I was volunteering. So they eventually brought me in as a play tester, and that was my title, but it didn't really reflect very accurately what I did, because once I came in, I started doing pretty much all kinds of marketing. I was probably the equivalent of a marketing assistant. As Aaron mentioned, I was kind of assisting him at the time, and eventually I just asked if I could have my title changed to more accurately reflect what I did, because if I was going to move on and do more marketing roles, it would probably look a lot better if my title was something like marketing coordinator instead of playtester when I'm trying to apply for marketing roles. And eventually it was changed, and I was marketing coordinator up until the very end of SCORE. Which will now lead us into our next question. What was it like to go from fan to playtester to game designer? I'll start with you two.
Well, to be very truthful, I wasn't a big fan of DBZ when it first came out. I knew of the property, but it was still Saiyan Saga back then, and they were still dealing with like dubbing issues and stuff. So I was still an anime fan. I loved Kenshin and, you know, all your staples back from the 90s. Evangelion, my huge list. But so when we were told to play test it, it's like, oh, that's kind of neat. I mean, we're getting to play test this trading card game that's going to come out, and it's based off of Dragon Ball. And we'll watch a couple episodes. Oh, okay, let's go back to playing again. So there really wasn't that big of a transition there. It really did feel rewarding though afterwards when they pulled us into customer service, because it felt like, well, hey, all that stuff we did, even though they didn't listen to everything, they saw the work and the effort. So that was like really neat. And then the new head of the games division came in, Chaz Elliott. Everything that you liked about Dragon Ball Z as it was going up into the peak, you know, all those crazy marketing ideas, the card countdowns, the literal like abrupt face direction change, like between Frieza and Trunks Saga, is all because of this gentleman. he came from Wizards of the Coast. He was a brand manager there. He was responsible for the Weatherlight branding stuff, all that CISA things and everything. So he liked to promote from within, and I busted my butt, answered like 100, 200 emails a day. And so when he just all of a sudden surprised everybody with, well, yeah, we need a tournament organizer. So you're really good at judging and trying to keep people in line. So Josh, you're going to be the tournament organizer. And he comes up to me and he's like, you know how to answer these questions. You understand the game the most out of everybody. So we're going to go ahead and make you the lead game developer. And I was like, are you serious? I'm not even old enough to drink yet. And I'm a lead game developer for a company. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And started really pouring my life into it. Like, Android Saga was the first set that myself and Israel Kiro's IQ, as most people know, really got to change things. We got to change some things in Trunk Saga. Masteries were introduced into the set, and clean up some things, but in general, we had to keep things in the same direction that Jim Ward wanted, or Sir Jim Ward. So Android Saga was the first one where we were really able to, Chad was like, yeah, you can cut 20, 30, 40 cards if you want. You can kill those, add some new ones. You know, we added in the battleground locations, and then seeing everybody's responses to the set and how that World Championship came out, you know, it was really rewarding. So it was very fun. And very lucky, but it's not all luck, because I wouldn't have been able to get to where I was if I didn't actually apply myself and bust my butt and even do the dumb things that you never want to do, because it matters in the long run.
Yeah, I was a big fan of Dragon Ball Z, so just getting to work on the property in itself was awesome. So I was a big anime fan, big card game fan growing up, still am. So just getting a chance to like work on Dragon Ball Z was pretty awesome, having some say. I didn't get to do, other than Kid Buu, I didn't do much with the original game. But like with GT and stuff like that, it was fun to get to do that. It was fun to play games all day, you know, it's like the dream job. I wasn't quite as young as David when I got in. I was old enough to drink. So we'd play games all day and go home and drink all night, and wake up in the morning and play games all day. And it was just like being at Gen Con, but every day of the weekend I was getting paid. So things kind of changed though a little bit when I moved to the design position, because a lot more responsibility. You can't just kind of show up and be hungover and be able to design card effects. It doesn't quite work. I can point out some cards, and I was like, oh, what's that card? Hungover, and that's why it's on that CRD list, you know. So, that's why it's on the ban list for all the indie players. Burned was a prime example of that. She got banned like right after the first tournament. So, the coolest part, the two coolest things that I liked about it, like I enjoyed the card, like designing cards and whatnot, and because I was in art school, I went to art school for 3 years before I came up to sport. The coolest parts about it were, once you move into the design position, I got to start going to lots of conventions, like lots and lots of conventions. So I got to interact with people and go to the community, you know, go to the communities. I got to travel, which was one of the things I liked. I got to go like Comic-Con, you know, we one year you go like Comic-Con, Wizard World, Philly, Chicago, Gen Con, Florida, Las Vegas. So it was a bunch of travel, which was really my favorite part of it. The next coolest part was when you go to the shows and you see the people playing the game and they're enjoying it. And it's like, wow, those people are enjoying what I spent all day working on. They're happy, you know, or they're upset. You know, some people get upset because they're really in, you know, they're getting upset. And this is, you know, I didn't mind when people got upset or they got on the message board and talk trash, because they cared enough to get on the message board and talk trash. If they didn't care, they wouldn't bother, you know. But if you were eliciting a response from them, they were interested enough in it to have a response, which something I learned from art school and having listened to a bunch of teachers tell me I was terrible at art. I was like, well, I gotta be better than that guy. He just looked at his picture and then walked away. He didn't even say anything. He spent 20 minutes telling me how I did that wrong, so I had to have done something right, or you wouldn't be criticizing me so much. But just getting to see the people's responses to all the stuff and the travel was awesome. Those are my favorite parts.
Well, mine was, I guess, bittersweet. because I played Buffy just because growing up as a kid I liked Buffy and all that jazz, and so they hired me on at SCORE, and that was great because about 2 weeks after they hired me on at SCORE and doing a little work on Buffy, they canned Buffy. So yeah, that was a great start, but it was tough for all of us because Z actually really shadowed Buffy a lot at that point, because Z was making tons of money for the company, or had made a lot of money at that point. They had just switched into the GT mode, and the management of the company was really kind of changing, especially at the real high point of the sports side of the company. And they kind of adapted this idea of wanting to do the spaghetti theory of throwing stuff at the wall and see if it sticks. So with me coming in and doing a little work on Buffy, kind of seeing things change with that and that going under, that was where Buffy was making money. It was profitable, but it wasn't profitable enough. So they canned it to put money into developing something new that might make more money. So that was really rough. I guess a transition for me, because they hired me on, as soon as that happens, management changes, the philosophy changes. But after being there and just kind of working my way up through the ranks, it was definitely interesting. I got to work with Garrett on some stuff kind of early. There were several other guys that were designers there that I got to work with. When they bumped me up to marketing pretty quickly, as far as actually getting to write advertising and do stuff like that, it was cool because I used to have to go interview the designers and be like, okay, give me some notes on this new release that's coming out, and tell me what's going to be cool and what can I talk to people about. So I kind of got to work with the designers and hear all the stuff before it actually got to release. And so then when I'd go to a trade show and they'd have me, work in the booth or run in the booth at a trade show, fans would come up and they'd always want the inside tip, and I could actually talk to them about it and just see how excited they were about the product. And that was always a lot of fun, getting to see fans face to face. And even if some of our player bases were smaller, I still think that for a large percentage of it, we definitely had some of the coolest fans in the world, because we're still friends with a lot of them. We still hang out with a lot of them and see them. And I definitely, in my store, I now own a game store in Texas. We're now the second largest game store in northern Texas, southern Arkansas, and southern Oklahoma. But I've had people that have come into my store because they remembered me as being a community manager, and they're just like, are you the same Aaron Giddings that worked for SCORE? I'm like, yeah. They're like, God, I love Inuyasha, or man, I really love Bleach, or I love, original DBZ. I remember seeing your name, writing articles, because I wrote a lot of the website copy for a little while. So still having that kind of interaction is really awesome. That's probably the best part.
Of course, I went from player right into kind of play testing, and so I was already really, really into the SCORE games. I still like CCGs. That's kind of my favorite type of game to play when it comes to tabletop. But I wasn't too into playtesting. It was cool to do, but what people don't understand is sometimes it gets pretty monotonous doing it all day. But then I found out something. I found out we could actually make cards, because the designer of Bleach, which is the game I was working on one day, was just like, man, I have to come up with like 100 cards. Josh, do you want to make some cards? And I was like, what? I can make cards? Like, that's every player's dream. That's every person's dream, where they play a game and they get to like add to it and put their own cards. So I was like, hell yeah, I want to make some cards. So I go, and this is my first card, so I'm just making all these crazy effects. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to put an alternate win condition on this card and stuff. And gave it to him, and it was exactly the crazy mess you'd expect. And yeah, most of them got rejected. So I just started making cards. And then after I made 5 that finally worked, it was like, well, how would you like to make like 5 more? And more and more and more. So I started making a bunch of cards for Bleach. And that was like really, really cool. And I was so proud of myself, and I was such a big fanboy. I knew I wasn't supposed to do this, but I'd call my friends up and be like, hey man, I just made all these cards, let me tell you exactly what they do. Virginia represent, all this stuff. and yeah, I was like really super excited about it. Until we started getting to the end, where it started to kind of be a struggle, and I was finally getting to see the effect of some of the cards I was making, because we weren't really that great at play testing. and there'd be cards that I would make, and they would completely ruin the game because they were like so broken. And I was like, oh, well that kind of sucks. Sorry about that, guys. Like, there are still some cards and things that were in Bleach that I'll apologize for, where I'm just like, yeah, the little mod souls, they probably shouldn't have done that. I really wasn't paying attention.
You're the reason we can't have nice things, John.
Yeah, I broke and messed up the game, but I thought it was really cool. But then something else happened, which was really awesome, where I didn't get to mess up Bleach, I got to mess up other games because they would just come to, there was only one other playtester, and then there's people like Garrett and Aaron, and a few other game designers, and our OP manager, and like our rules guy, and they would just come to us and they would say, oh, Viz got in touch with us, they want to make a Death Note game, if you guys want to do that, go ahead. And I'd be like, I can actually just go over there and spend time working on this like all week? And they're like, yeah, take as much time as you need to work on these games. And so that became me and the other playtesters like big thing. It's like, we're going to make the next big game, it's going to be super big, and it's going to be hit. And it didn't work out with Death Note, but then Cartoon Network approached us, and they had a few properties they wanted to make, but the one that stuck out to me was Metalocalypse, because we loved that show. And that was the one that I felt we finally did right. Like, me and this other guy, we came up with something and brought it out, we showed it to everybody, and they were just like, oh, okay, yeah, this is good, this is good. It wasn't like the whole hop to your feet and, hallelujah, you discovered the greatest game in the world, but it was like, yeah, this is good, we'll just go with this. And I finally got to see what it was like to be a game designer, and my game getting built up and mocked up and everything, and they took it to Cartoon Network, and the boss came back, it's like, yeah, we talked to Brandon Small and all of them, oh, they really love the game, everyone loves it, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is going to happen, and I'm going to be in Walmart and Kmart, it's going to have my name on it, and this is going to be so cool. And then Score Entertainment ended and the game never came out. And it was so, so heartbreaking for me because I was just so proud of this game. Years later, I showed up, Garrett called me one time because he was at Comic-Con, and he's just like, are you watching Adult Swim right now? And I was like, no, why, what's up? Well, they just played a commercial for your game. And I'm like, what? And so it hadn't been posted on the Bump websites yet because they'd all just copied the bumps on Cartoon Network and put them on the website. So I stayed up all night because they just replayed Cartoon Network, our Adult Swim stuff, like 3 hours later. So I stayed up all night until I finally saw this where it's just like, here's a picture of the Metalocalypse board game. We don't know what this is about and where this came from. And I was like, I do. So a few years later, I eventually met John Snepp, who worked on the show, and I was like, I had a piece of the game, like the one piece I could have, and he's just like, oh, I remember this, I want to take a picture of it. He took a picture of it, he put it on Twitter, he signed it, and he's like, man, someday, and that's what he put on it, someday. I think he was lying. I'm pretty sure that ship has sailed, and so it was kind of bittersweet for me. But let's go into our...
One more thing.
Yes.
Really the best part about working at SCORE was the people we worked with. Because we are all still friends years later after SCORE. We all came to Gen Con together. We've been coming to Gen Con together for years now. And like, these are my friends in life now, are all the guys that I started working with.
Our relationships got a lot better as we stopped working.
Yeah, it's hard to work next to somebody creatively because creative people have, disagreements about stuff. We talk about our epic design battles, and marketing differences and whatnot.
If you don't think it gets heated behind closed doors of designing card games, you're wrong.
Oh.
There were definitely some days where there was some storming out of conference rooms.
Yeah.
There might have been a few years where some of us on this panel weren't talking to other people. And this went on for years.
Yeah. So we used to just lock the playtesters because there was a period there where we would just lock all the playtesters in a room and just be like, they're going to hash it out. Not let them out for 6 hours until they all come out of there.
Isn't that why y'all called it the war room?
Yep, we called it the war room. The playtesting room was the war room.
And there'd be cards stuck in the ceiling and all kinds of stuff. And those guys were going at each other. And I'd walk in there, only a few times did I ever walk in it, because that was like sacred ground for the designers and the playtest team. I'd walk in there and we'd be standing around and a card would like fall out of the ceiling and hit me on the head. I'd be like, what? There's just cards stuck everywhere because those guys would just stuck them in the room.
So,
David and I, we were generally on the same sides in most arguments, and it generally dealt when we were trying to pitch ideas to the next level up, and there's just a disconnect. They're business people, not game people, and it's hard to speak those two different languages if there's no one in between to kind of moderate it. So we'd come out of those meetings and be so upset. He smoked cigarettes, I don't, so we just walk around the building. And walk around the building, and walk around the building, and the building is complete, like there's complete glass windows around all the buildings. So everybody else in the building, because they have open cubicles, can just watch us walk. And based on how many laps we did, they could tell how angry we were.
that was my first real introduction to Chippy, because I walked in one day, and me and Chippy had not really been introduced really formally at that point, other than briefly. And one day I walked into the office, and I remember looking out the window, and he's just circling the building, and it was about the third time I saw him pass by the front window. And I walked in talking to somebody, and I said, hey, what's he doing out there? And they're like, oh, he's got to be mad about something. And I said, what do you mean? It's like, oh, he does pace laps around the building when he gets mad about something. So I'm sure the design meeting didn't go well. So that was my first introduction to Chippy, and I definitely later on asked him, I was like, so you take some stress laps, huh? And he was like, oh yeah, that's my thing. I was like, all right.
Me and Aaron had the key to the warehouse, and not everyone did, so sometimes we would just go and hang out in there. But
Oh,
we
yeah.
lost Steve, where it's just like, oh man, I gotta blow off some steam about this person. Where can that person not go? The warehouse. Aaron, I need your help in the warehouse.
Yeah, we would definitely hide there, and then like there would definitely be a page over the intercom, Josh Morse, the warehouse please, or we'd call the phone, hey dude, you need to come out in the warehouse and help me with this. So as soon as you walk through the door, you just lay into them going, God, this sucks, such and such and this and that.
Aaron called me, he's like, I need help building Inuyasha tournament kits. Really, that was just our Vin session.
Yeah, it was so private, like towards the end, there was like a period where I was actually trying to find another job, and they would schedule phone interviews for me. I would just go to the warehouse and be interviewing for other jobs while I was out at score. And I'd come back and like, what were you doing out there? I was like, warehouse stuff. Yeah.
Driving forth.
Yeah. So I guess that kind of answers one of the other question that I was going to ask is what made SCORE different from other companies? Is there anything else anyone wants to add, or do you want to just go to the next question?
I kind of touched on it earlier, but one of the things that made it different than other companies is that we were private owned, so we weren't like some of these companies are big corporations. We did a good job of making at least the game division look like it was huge. DBZ, and they did a lot of things. Like really, DBZ was always just kind of like made by like a
You
handful.
know you're big when somebody comes up to the front door and asks for the Inuyasha division.
Oh yeah, this is pretty funny too. Like, so like, we always did a good job of making people think that we were this huge company, but I don't think we ever like our biggest heyday. I was like, yeah, we really kicked it. We had like 10 people on staff, compared to some of these companies that have hundreds of people on staff. Like, imagine how many people work at WotC making Magic. DBZ was a big thing, but it was it was David. David, it was him, and then like Inuyasha, I'd sit there and I'd be like, okay, it's time to make Inuyasha cards. Write 250 cards. Okay, it's time to put the titles on the cards. Okay, write 250 titles. Where you go to other places and there's like, what does that guy do? He writes the titles for all the cards. What? That's all he does? And this guy's like, what does that guy do? Oh, he manages all the images for the cards. What? I want to work over there. But that allowed the products to be very personal. So like, pretty much, you looked at a product and like that was like 75% one person's vision, which allowed focus. There wasn't like a lot of design by committee stuff. So like you have these things where Yu Yu Hakusho being the exception, because almost every set of that was designed by a different person. So you'd have one set that went this direction and one set that went that direction. At least for the games, for the most part, the other games, everything was kind of going in one direction. The person had ideas of what he was going to do. And it also made it easy to lay blame on something if something failed. You couldn't just be like, well, we couldn't get our shit together because no one could agree. It's like, well, dude, you just were wrong, or that was a bad idea. But then when it worked out, it was just like, wow, that was awesome. You're a genius, that did super well. And another thing too that made it really special is like, because of this, how small we were the company, all of us did multiple things, kind of touching like how we would go to the trade shows and we would run tournaments. But it's like great, like how many other games were the designers the guys that when you went to the tournaments, those were the guys running the tournaments, and you could talk directly to them and whatnot, and interact with them, and it allowed us to kind of do really fan servicey things in the sets. We'd go to tournaments and people would they really love like bandits and Inuyasha. So next set I'd make bandits based on kind of how card games people have their own lingo to it. So like Dragon Ball Z people go sphere instead of Trunks Energy Sphere. people talk about, just the lingo that comes with card games. Because of that personality, we were able to go in and like kind of directly fan service the releases, which is cool. Not a lot of games can do that, and allowed us to build relationships and friendships with the actual community. Like a lot of these guys, like there's a bunch of people in this room that they're on my Facebook. They're my friends on Facebook and stuff like that. And that came from that, and allowed us to also we all are very experienced in a lot of things. Like we all know how to build booths. Like we can leave those booths out there. Which, all these other companies, there's people they're bringing in, that's all they do is build these booths, they go sit at the hotel for 5 days, they break it down. We did all that,
Yeah.
We would, Aaron, when he was an OP guy, he'd also go to sales meetings. I would go to licensing meetings and have to talk directly with Japanese licensors. We didn't really have intermediates. You were the one-man shop for whatever you worked on. You dealt with everything. So it allowed us to get a lot of experience, which was a lot different.
Especially at the end, because as the gaming side kind of took a backseat to sports, there were probably 7 of us at the height of like Bleach and stuff.
We should mention that Sword Entertainment was part of Donruss,
Yeah.
and they had a huge sports division. We were just one division in it. So when we
That
mentioned
company
sports,
was a sports card company, and at that point, it was probably, as far as football and things were concerned, was probably the largest in the United States for doing sports cards, and it was always a top 3 sports card manufacturer, even at the height of football and baseball
So,
cards.
like when people would come to the office, they'd walk into this, I'm talking big office, and people, 100 plus people in that office, and you'd go back and there's like the room, they would all like, we always kind of like, we had the war room originally, which is where all the playtesters would be, and then they built us, like we were starting to feel good because we had Z going well, GT had just come out, and GT did well for 2 sets just because it was an extension of Dragon Ball Z, and stores were still buying it, and fans really hadn't gotten fed up with it yet, so they hadn't stopped buying it. They were hoping it was going to bounce back and turn around. Inuyasha came out and was doing gangbusters, so they actually built us our own little extension, so we got our own office. And when we finally got it, it was like a third of the size of what we used to have. Everybody's cubicles were like about this big, So it was like you're kind of in a closet, and they refer to it as a fishbowl. Because there's one door in, and there's this big glass wall, like you were in it behind a zoo cage, and there's this big open space between us and the rest of the company, the sports card people. And you'd see like, football stars and stuff come through all the time, and they'd walk by that glass like we were at an exhibit, and they'd be like, these are our game guys, these guys are hardcore. They would always spit it, we looked like gamers, At that time I had long hair, piercings, punk rocker dude, and they're like, that guy's the guy who does Inuyasha, look at that dude, you want to talk music, talk to that guy. That dude over there, Abe, man, he loves World of Warcraft, man. You want to talk MMOs, go talk to that guy. So they come in there, and we think they're going to want to talk about our product, but no, they just want to talk video games with us. You guys play Halo, Gears of War, and they just send us over there, and it was kind of like, it was really weird. And then finally, when they brought in like the Bible Quest stuff, they gave the fishbowl to the Bible Quest people, and then they moved us into like the dungeon back right next to where they would like have people cutting up jerseys, so they could put them in sports cards and stuff. So all that stuff was like handmade. So they put us back in this dimly lit room. I mean, literally the room, it was like a closet kind
You
of.
used your cell phone to light the papers
Yeah.
that you were working on.
Yeah, we had
That's
that,
not
so
right.
for like the end of Inuyasha and all of Bleach, we were like, I guess that's the only time you were ever there. Was
yeah, like when I came in, you guys were already over there.
already out of the fishbowl, so it was just funny. So like we were talking about the story was one day where these 2 like Inuyasha fans from the local area show up because like they weren't able to buy like starter decks for the new set, and they were like, well, let's just go to Score's office and ask them. So they literally just like looked up our office on the internet and came, and you drive by the building, and it looks like most offices. It's a nondescript building. It looks kind of like a warehouse.
Unmarked building.
Unmarked, so we wouldn't have things like people coming up to us wanting to come into the company, So like, I get this call one day from like the lady at the front desk, and she's like,
Oh, she called me.
oh, she called you?
Yeah, she called me, and she was like, hey, Aaron, I have a weird request. And I said, what? She was like, there's these 2 guys at the front door, and they're asking for the Inuyasha division. And I said, we don't have an Inuyasha division. We have the game division. She was like, I don't know. Can you just go out there and, get rid of them? And I said, well, yeah, but now, understand that at that point, the games division was the redheaded stepchild of this company. Our funding had been cut considerably. There's only a few of us in the building, So the sports people, the worst possible thing to happen to them is some gamers show up at the front door of the building, right? So I walk out there, and I'm just like, can I help you guys?
and they just start laying these questions about game mechanics and getting the product, and why can't this local store carry it? And I said, hold on just one moment. So I walk up to the front desk is there, and I said, Garrett Wilkinson to the front, please. So Garrett comes up there and he's like, what, dude? And I'm like, can you come out here and help me with this problem? So I just remember we go out there, and I had a meeting to get to after about 30 minutes of these guys talking, and I was like, hey Garrett, man, these guys are gonna really enjoy talking. I got a meeting to get to. I will talk to you in just a little while. So I duck out of there. I was in a meeting for like an hour, hour and a half. I come out and Garrett is still out there talking to these guys, trying to keep them from coming in the building.
Yeah, we were told, don't let them.
Don't let them in under any circumstances.
So I go out there, and it's kind of awkward at first, but they're really enthusiastic to meet me. They're like, oh, because they know, because like I said, the designers were very, we would go to the shows and we'd interact directly with people. And, that most people thought we'd go back to this big ass office and whatnot. It was really just us and this little operation. But these guys are really enthusiastic. So I'm like, well, I'll sit out here and talk to them. And they're like, we can't buy these new Stargates, we can't find them anywhere. Because a lot of, despite Inuyasha's success, it wasn't a success necessarily as a card game, it was a success as a collectible product. And these guys were actually into the game. So it was cool to actually talk about the game mechanics. Because I'd go to like an anime show, and I'd end up just talking about like the Inuyasha with the ears, or the Inuyasha where he's a little boy, because that's what the fans want to talk about. Because they were really into the art on those cards, or the autographs and the sets. So I was like, okay, I'll sit out here and talk to these guys. And eventually, kind of just to get them to leave, because they just kept going on and on and on and on. I was like, those starter decks you guys want? I got like 2 of them on my desk, I'll give them to you. So I go inside and I give them the starter decks, and they eventually leave. And I come back inside, and the lady at the front desk has a bottle of Purell, like hand sanitizer, and she just hands it to me immediately. And she's like, that took a while. I was like, yeah. And I go back and I meet Aaron, and Aaron comes back later on. He's like, how'd you get rid of those guys? I was like, I gave them 2 starters. He's like, that might have been a bad idea. Because if they go on the message board and say, you can show up at store entertainment, they'll give you starters to leave or whatever. I was like, oh crap.
I was like, you should move Garrett's desk next to the
I was really didn't think about that. So, luckily that never happened again. But those guys are still like big anime fans. So even to this day, whenever I go to anime conventions in Dallas, I'll be like walking around, and those 2 guys will walk up to me. This happened in front of like a bunch of my Magic friends, and they were just like, what? And I'm walking around, and they come up to me, and they're like, that's Garrett. Garrett, oh man, what are you doing? They're talking to me, and like the guy's like, oh, stay right here, man, stay right here. So he brings like all these people over and whatnot. And all my Magic friends, the guys I play Magic with, they knew I designed games, but they had never like actually saw any of the fans from the time. They were just like, we knew you guys made these games, but they never saw any of the fans. And they're coming over, and this guy's just like, come on guys, look, I want you to meet somebody. This is the Garrett Wilkinson. He was the designer of the Inuyasha card game, and they're just like, what's going on? What is going on? And they're all like, shaking my hand and all this stuff. And eventually I'm like, oh guys, I gotta go back to like this party or Magic tournament or whatever. I said it was like 3 o'clock in the morning at AnimeCon. So, and they leave and they're just like, what did you used to do? Who are these people? I was like, don't worry about it. It's all good, man.
You're welcome.
So it's cool because it's nice to see that the stuff that we were like, this is a big, cool kick for us because we get to come here and we get to see all you guys come and be excited about stuff we did a long time ago. We're all moved on to other things. It makes us feel, it's cool that it touched other people because we put a lot of heart and soul in those things. You guys obviously enjoy it. There's not, when we do the tournaments and stuff, there's not like prizes really. You guys are playing for the fun of the game and stuff like that. We really appreciate it.
I do want to say that there is a slight downside to that whole, everybody knows who you are, who the game designers are, because they go to all the conventions. I went to all the conventions as a marketing coordinator. And so then you start having people think, well, I'm the one who makes the business decisions. Garrett's the one who gets it into Walmart. They don't know Garrett's role or any of the other marketing that there's people we answer to. So sometimes if someone really doesn't like something that we did, they put our names on it. And I had this problem when I was working on Bleach, that something was going on, or I can't remember what it was exactly, but they attached my name to it, that I was ruining the game, which I actually was because of all the cards I was making, but they didn't know that. They were complaining about something about like it being in stores or something that was way beyond my control, and so there was one message board that made a petition to get me fired, and it went out for like 30 pages of just people flaming me. Now, at the time I was pretty hot-headed about it, but then I thought, it's funny, whatever, and it was still there for years and years and years. So flash forward to 2 years later, and I take this girl out on a date, and we're sitting there at the table, and she asks me, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "What?" It's like, "Have you ever worked for a company called Score Entertainment?" And I was like, "Yeah, why do you ask? How'd you know that?" It's like, "Well, before this date, I Googled your name." And I found this 30-page petition to get you fired. Is that why you don't work for them anymore? That was the last date we had. So why don't we flash forward to the end and say, when did you realize that it was going to end? Now, Chippy, you were kind of already out before Score Entertainment ended. I don't know if there was any writing on the wall for you, but
Why I left.
that's a good story.
Well, I'm someone that likes to constantly improve myself. Nobody's perfect, nor myself. I want to get better, I want to get smarter, mentally stronger, stuff like that. Which is, if you know me, you think that's kind of a weird concept, but that is a big part of me. There was a big event that happened inside Donruss Playoff. I don't know how much we're allowed to get into it, but it really changed a lot of the dynamics inside of the company.
Not just the company, it changed, I think, the industry as a whole because of the sports card side.
Yeah, and it was really big, and it had a rippling effect into our game division that we did not expect. It totally blindsided us. We were like, really? That's happening? Oh crap!
Right, we lost 75% of the department in one day.
Yeah.
Without anybody knowing, like my brother, we're all coming into the building, and that's my brother, and like 3 or 4 of the playtesters, because I would always hang out with all the playtesters, we all lived in the same apartment complex, we carpool to work. So I come to the building, the front door, I scan my key, I walk in, and we have to go through the break room. They stop me, and they stop everybody else, and they're like, "Garrett, go on in, everybody else has to stay here." So I go into the fishbowl, I sit down in my cubicle, I'm like, okay, obviously they're going to talk to them about hygiene or something. It was something that was actually people complaining about was hygiene. And 30 minutes later, I get a phone call from my brother, and he's like, "They won't let us back in the building. Apparently, we're not allowed back in the building anymore." And the next thing you know, finish it off.
Yeah, the CEO of the company walks in and starts telling us what's going on. And we're like, what the hell? And they're like, well, so because of this, we have to let all the playtesters go right now. Because the rest of the company was going to be going through such a huge change. And like other panel members, the games division being the redheaded stepchild was always there since day one because we were in sports. So if the rest of the company was going to be going through a big change, but the game guys weren't, that wasn't going to go over very well. So a lot of decisions were made to also, make sure that the sports guys, everybody was going to get hurt, but just not hurt as bad, because then they would look down at our fishbowl and go, well, why isn't anything happening to those guys? So, the company was starting on its little downward spiral, and at that point, I had learned everything that I could from Score Entertainment. I can take any property from scratch, and I know every step along the way until it gets out to the distributors and eventually to the stores and the players. Every single little thing. In fact, one day from a very interesting discussion at the head of the games division, I actually wrote out that 6 to 7 pages, the roles and responsibilities of a game designer, and it just pointed out every single little step. There was nothing more for me to learn. There was no advancement. They 2 times tried to get me to be the head of the games division, and I turned it down both times because, except for Chaz, nobody lasted longer than 6 months in that position. And I was already doing the dream job. Why do I want to manage people that design games?
And you're also really young to be managing people older than you were.
Yeah, and no, I won't manage people to design games. I want to design the games, screw that. So, but, so there was no really moving up for me by my own choice. There's nothing left for me to learn. So, you know, I kind of saw the writing on the wall, and they started letting more and more people go from the sports side and everything. And I was like, you know, I don't think I can make a career off of cardboard crack. You know, this is really fun, but it's not something I can do for the rest of my life. You know, I may still be able to do it for the next 5-10 years, but you know, EverQuest had come out, kicked the balls out of TCGs. You know, and the more online good games kept coming out, and TCGs kept going down and down and down. So it's like I got to do something different. So that's why I was like, yeah, the writing's kind of on the wall there. So I proactively talked to the management. I had, from a previous fiasco where they thought I was leaving and I wasn't, they made sure that I did certain things. And I came back to them and was like, you know, I did do X, Y, and Z. All my knowledge is in Garrett and Ake. You know, they know how to do everything. They don't need me here anymore. I fulfilled all these other conditions. I think it's kind of time to move on. So I turned in my 2-week notice, and they kind of let me leave that day. And we're just like, yeah, we'll just pay you out the 2 weeks. Just come pick your stuff up and go. And I was like, yes, sir. The concept of fully leaving TCGs hadn't gone out of my system. I had a brief tenure for Upper Deck when they were working on their Versa system, and the beginnings of what would eventually be the WoW TCG. And that's when I got to learn how different Score was from everybody else. Like Garrett said, they just had a person, just the art. Like that, his responsibility was maintaining the images. There was one guy, his entire role was just titles and flavor text. Like he doesn't do anything else, really. And they had like 5 to 6 designers per game, and you know there were times where Score was only 5 to 6 people big. So it was very eye-opening, but it still let me realize, wow, cardboard crack just isn't going to cut it. So I realized that what everybody had been telling me my entire life was true. Smart guy, why the hell have I not gone to college yet? So I just dropped out, got myself signed up for UT Arlington, and 5 years later got my degree. So that was kind of my path towards the end. I'm someone that likes to look at the big picture, and I knew it wasn't going to happen in days, weeks, or months, but I saw everything going down, and I wanted to continue to improve myself and make sure that I have a future and a career. So that's why I ended up like, okay, I gotta go, guys. So I think it was 2-3 years later.
There's no panel on, we just keep going until somebody kicks us out.
Yeah, I was gonna say, once Jimmy's finished with that story, why don't we open it up to questions?
That's
our next panel.
yeah, that was kind of the wrapping up of that story there. But yeah, the writing was on the top.
Do we have any questions until someone can come up?
Why don't you think Dragon Ball Z has ever been brought out with all the popularity? Doesn't anybody see that from a gaming standpoint, that there's all these fans and websites devoted to it?
All right, it would have to be that version of Dragon Ball Z, and that version of Dragon Ball Z.
Even if it was more cleaned up?
Yeah, okay, the biggest issue is, Dragon Ball Z, while it's still popular, is not what it was, say, 1999, 2002, 2003. It's not moving 1 million DVDs, you know? So, is it like, we kind of touched on it in the panel, it's a huge property worldwide, there's a lot of legs to it, but the licensing fees and cost to it alone would outweigh any money you can make off of a card game. Like, you would have to have those old numbers to make money off of it, so. That's the thing. Like you could probably have a good following, you know, but it's just not enough money. Like Bandai tried, and they just never could get the numbers to sustain the cost of having the license.
Yeah, the licensing fees were pretty astronomical. And so even in the early days, like there was a small fear for a while around Android Saga where it was like, we're going to lose this license if we don't make X amount of money. And they told me the number, and I was like,
Yeah.
They want that much.
And more than that, I mean, it's not cheap to make a card game these days anyway. I mean, look at how many of the big companies, how much they have to put into it. I mean, the licensing fees alone for something like a Japanese property are fairly extensive in comparison to some of the American properties. A lot of the fans don't understand that when you're dealing with these Japanese companies, it's an intense situation. You know, when you're dealing with American companies, we all kind of understand American customs, but when you're dealing with Japanese companies, their customs, their way of business, everything is just completely different. You know, there's certain expectations that they have that in American culture we don't necessarily see it the same way. And so to get Japanese properties and make them happen like that, it's even far more difficult, and it's hard enough just to make American properties into card games. So.
Yeah, I don't know if people realize that once you have a license, it's not that you can do whatever you want to it. There's actually an approval process that goes right down to the images you put on the cards and what you title those cards.
And even card mechanics.
Even
Card
card
mechanics are.
That's
like-
why there's like, the cards that do the exact same thing, but they're called battlegrounds or locations.
Yeah. Battlegrounds and locations were purely because Funimation was like, there wasn't a fight there, how can that be a battleground? They didn't do that, you know, or, you know, some of the oddities you may see on some of the cards, like the Kid Boo's Crash, and we had to say, hey, for our game, it's still a Majin Buu card, because for a while they're like, well, they're all Majin Buus, and then you have the little Kid Buu split, and they're like, well, we know what we told you before, but we want this changed.
Hang on. Sir, are you here for the next panel? Okay, so why don't we go ahead and wrap this up so they can
Yes.
do the next panel, because apparently there are someone out here who don't want to take up too much of their time.
If you have some other questions, I think
We'll be hanging
we'll
around.
hang out outside the panel room here, and you guys can kind of approach us and just ask a couple of
And
questions.
we can get better answers than ones we'll give on camera.
Thanks everybody for showing up.